On January 17th, 1987, gunmen broke into the Shelby Adult Bookstore in North Carolina and ordered the 5 men inside to lay face down on the floor. After shooting each man, the gunmen robbed the facility of its $300 to $400, set off their gasoline-filled bombs, and fled the scene as flames tore through the building. To this day, those gunmen remain unknown, and the case remains active but cold. Join us today as we discuss the murders at the Shelby Adult Bookstore. Welcome back to
Unknown,
Unsolved,
Unseen,
Triple U.
Woohoo! I'm your host, Frank.
And I'm Sage.
And this is Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen, where you come for your weekly dose of strange happenings, unsolved mysteries, and everything else under the sun.
Basically, it's a what the hell is going on?
Yep. And sorry about not putting an episode out last week. That was on me. I just didn't get my episode in time, and we skipped over that week, so that's my bad.
We had a busy week. My little sister graduated and had her grad party, so that was exciting. So, and we took our dog to a really fun day at a local store that does a big day dedicated to dogs. So we had some stuff that we did, and then, things happen. We didn't get an episode out, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm trying to make sure we don't get delayed on this next week, because it's going to be tight again, but I don't think we should see this delay again for a little bit, guys.
Yeah, and we've got some fun stuff coming up that you'll get to see once it's ready.
Yep. Sage, do you have anything else you want to go over before we start getting into some of this?
I just have the trigger warnings, but do you have anything?
I don't believe I have anything else for right now.
Okay. So the trigger warnings are mentions of anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, and lots of mention of white supremacy groups, including the KKK, hate crimes, a lot of murder via shooting, arson, and then there's also mentions of pornography in adult bookstores, as that is where this crime took place at. Located in the town of Shelby, North Carolina in Cleveland County was an adult entertainment bookstore.
Actually, real quick, I want to bring up one more thing. We're doing this episode here because it is still June and it is Pride Month. So we want to, like how we did the Doodler last year, we want to do one episode highlighting the unsolved crimes of hate that are done against the LGBTQ plus. Each year for Pride Month, we want to do typically one. There's not enough for us to do one every week for the whole month for a continued amount of time.
Which is, I would say, fortunate.
Yeah. The less unsolved ones, the better.
Yeah.
The less in general is better, but unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. That is the world we'd prefer.
Yeah. But we do like to, like Frank said, highlight some of these cases, and maybe one day they'll no longer be unsolved.
And some of you might not be happy with that, so tough shit.
Fuck off.
I had a podcast reach out to us that wanted to collab at one point, that they had somebody on that called LGBTQ plus people demons. And that they're Satan's work, and I'm just, wouldn't be. Hopefully, we don't share some listeners in that, but
I mean, if we do, maybe don't.
In this space, there's, quite a few hateful people. So we're offending you. Sorry, tough shit.
Yeah, we're not bigots over here. So I will make fun of you if you say Burger King has the best French fries, though. But I won't judge you for who you choose to love or how you choose to love.
They disrespected the King lately in their newest ad. Talked about how that wasn't effective for Burger King and how they lost their identity in that time, but I think the King was one of the best things that happened to Burger King.
Yeah. Anywho, so the Shelby Bookstore was an adult entertainment bookstore. This is basically one that houses pornography and other sexually related items and media. It was situated on U.S. Highway 74, also known as East Dixon Boulevard. It was known to attract gay male customers because of the inclusivity and anonymity that they could maintain while seeking discreet encounters. As I mentioned earlier, the store offered pornographic materials, including videos and magazines, as well as private viewing booths, which often featured partitions that allowed for anonymous interactions between patrons. That comes into play later. That would be why I mentioned it. Prior to the events that I'm going to go on to discuss, this bookstore was already facing scrutiny and cultural disapproval of businesses that are aimed at some type of sexual orientation. According to the census in 1980, the town's population was estimated to be about 16,000 by 1987. So I think it was at like the end of the 14,000s in 80. By 87, when this occurred, it was about 16,000. It was located in the Bible Belt, with a community reflecting more conservative values with strong evangelical Christian influences. This resulted in limited tolerance for establishments like adult bookstores, most especially those geared towards gay men. No specific local ordinances or protests targeting the Shelby Bookstore in the mid-1980s are documented, but such venues nationally drew scrutiny for moral and zoning concerns, according to those within, the town. Unfortunately, stores like this were often vulnerable to theft because they were operated on cash-only operations that were reliant on coin or token-operated booths for video playback. This meant that there were on-site high accumulations of coins, sometimes cash, which was a common risk for isolated adult venues that were lacking, great security measures. This environment underscored potential motives like robbery, given the absence of armed guards, or surveillance common in places of higher traffic retail. Your Targets, Walmarts, things like that would have been the first to get security cameras. No public records indicate prior ownership details or significant criminal complaints against this establishment in police files through 1986, right before this occurred. Though broader studies from the period linked proximate areas around sexually oriented businesses to have elevated rates of robbery and disorder due to their remote placements and also their after-hours activities. So this lack of security would unfortunately prove fatal for 3 men and seriously injured 2 others. In the late hours of January 17th, 1987, 19-year-old Travis Melton was working at the shop where 29-year-old Kenneth Godfrey and 26-year-old Paul Weston were shopping. 2 other men, James Paris and John Anthony, were also at the shop at this time.
How old were they?
I didn't have the dates for them, and I think that's because those are the survivors.
Okay.
3 or 4, it's ultimately unknown, gunmen dressed in brown corduroy coats and brownish gold ski masks entered the store to commit an armed robbery. Though likely they intended to kill the occupants because of what happened next, so robbery wasn't just what they were there for. The gunman ordered the 5 men, so that's Travis, Kenneth, Paul, James, and John, to lie face down on the floor, where they would go on to shoot each man execution style in the back of the head. Travis, Kenneth, and Paul were killed instantly, while James and John were severely injured but remained alive. The gunman did not know that those 2 men had survived, and the gunman continued to ransack the building while those men laid there. Before fleeing the scene, the gunman would go on to open the cash register and take all of the money, which was somewhere between $300 and $400 cash, which in 1987 was quite a good bit amount of money. I would say that's also a good bit of money now, too. And then using gasoline-filled jugs as homemade incendiary devices, set fire to the building with the 5 men inside. The 2 surviving victims were left for dead, but managed to exit the building prior to succumbing to the fire. Ultimately, the building did not fully burn, which allowed for some evidence to be found, though I'm going to get into that later. James and John, the 2 survivors who escaped, managed to, mind you, with gunshot wounds to the head, flag down a passing motorist on the US Route 74 highway who was able to alert police to what was happening in the building. Emergency first responders arrived to find the men outside the structure, obviously suffering severe blood loss from their injuries. Altogether, the entire incident unfolded over an estimated 5 to 10 minutes based on scene analysis and survivor timelines.
Wow, that's very short.
Very short. So, the police arrived at the Shelby Adult Bookstore shortly after midnight on January 17th. So remember, this happened late January 17th? Or late, I think it's somewhere around midnight. So it's like right before and right after. So It started on the 17th. I think it went into the 18th of 1987. They had been alerted to a fire that was located at the establishment after firefighters had arrived and upon extinguishing the flames, found 3 bodies inside the building. I also read that the police had been alerted first to the scene and then the firefighters arrived, so I'm not exactly sure who got there first. So I don't know if it was someone called about a fire, firefighters showed up, found the bodies, or if someone called about the bodies and that there happened to be a fire when they got there, and then the firefighters showed up after the police. Either way, both units were on scene. The firefighters obviously had to extinguish the flames too prior to letting the police, safely investigate anything that had happened in the building. Police initiated a crime scene investigation with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation following the bodies of the 3 men being found. As mentioned earlier, the scene found that 3 men had been killed after being forced to lay face down on the floor and then shot at least once each in the head with a .22 and .45 caliber handguns. Part of the reason, other than victim testimony, that they believe that there was more than one gunman was because different caliber guns were used for different victims. Police determined that this was consistent with execution-style killings as well, where they shot them in the head. According to autopsy reports, there was no evidence of sexual assault or other trauma that would indicate motives beyond robbery and murder. Forensic analysis of the scene recovered bullet casings from the guns used in the shooting, blood samples from pools on the ground, though at this time, blood analysis was not that well advanced like we have now. Fibers from the intruder's clothing. So I'm not sure how they figured this out other than through witness testimony. There had to have been other fibers there and a lack of conclusivity for these being related to the clothing of the killers, but the victim stated it was brown corduroy. I don't know if you can tell that just from fibers.
I'm assuming they have the fibers of the clothing of the 2 survivors, and the other 3 men, theirs would have been burned up, so I don't know how you wouldn't identify to those 3 men who died.
Yeah, the fire didn't burn everything in the building, so the men really didn't have a whole lot of...
So then you can compare against possibly the 3 dead men and the 2 survivors and realize if it doesn't match with any of those 5, then it has to be from the suspect.
I would say it doesn't have to be. It could be. Because you don't know the kind of foot traffic that was in there that day.
That too, yeah.
But all in all, they had fibers from some kind of clothing.
And maybe it could have been that the fiber came from an area where only employees would have been, and the suspects were there, and that somewhere.
That is true because they did go to the cash registers and stuff.
Yeah, so if the fibers were somehow there, then that would not be somewhere where the regular people would be. Therefore, it would only be staff, and you can compare it against the staff that was there.
They also found the remnants of 5 improvised incendiary devices that consisted of plastic jugs filled with gasoline and were ignited via model rocket kit fuses. Frank, have you ever used model rockets when you were younger?
No.
Toby used to do them all the time. We used to drive super far from Mechanicsburg to go launch them in the middle of fields when we were younger. But I was just thinking, so they used the igniters from those model rockets to ignite the...
You don't bring this stuff if you're only planning on robbing a place.
No, you don't. Clearly, like you said, based on the incendiary devices, the goal of the killers was to erase and obscure as much evidence as possible, and they were not just there for a robbery. The arson attempt, which had been identified through chemical traces and burn patterns, had partially damaged the wooden structure and the interior furnishings of the building, but ultimately burned insufficiently to consume the whole site into flames. So their goal, if that was their goal, they didn't execute it very well, which is a good thing. But this enabled the recovery of the shell casings and some other forensic evidence. Initial response from investigators was prioritizing securing the scene and providing aid to the 2 surviving men over immediately pursuing suspects due to the survivor accounts describing masked men, with one acting as a lookout outside and not knowing what the gunmen would look like without their coats or masks on. This meant that the searches did not expand much past the building, which could have impacted the overall investigation in the long run. So, we can't definitively say that, but I also would say that it is important to provide care to the individuals that survived instead of just immediately searching for a suspect. I don't know. I'm not an investigator. Inside the buildings, like I said, the bodies had been found, and the cash register was found open and empty. Again, so part of this motive was robbery. However, from the beginning, police were able to ascertain that the attack on the bookstore was not your, ordinary robbery, but rather was likely something more than that. The assault had been so systematic, and that investigators noted that the front door was unlocked and the rear door had been secured, which meant that there was a controlled entry and exit of the killers through one door. It was also too violent. 5 young men shot execution style to the back of the head while lying down on the floor. What little money at the time, because realistically, $300 to $400 in a robbery, if you're going to go to jail for money, you're going to, that's why people rob banks.
Obviously, that is worth a lot more then, but still,
it's not the same as robbing a bank.
Yeah, and that being that coordinated for only that much is just unlikely.
Yeah. So what little money in the cash register that they took did not account for the level of brutality that the 5 men faced. So some potential motives. Seeing as there's no official outcome to the story, we don't know the motive. Initially, the police first speculated that the attack was linked to an organized crime pornography network due to the nature of the building, as well as the male gay clientele that the store was known for. I do think that an initial assumption of that is quite presumptuous and honestly really homophobic, that they would say that just because this adult bookstore had a significant number of gay clientele, that the first thought would be organized pornography crime.
Organized,
yeah.
It's like other pornographers were...
Like a network of organized crime around pornography. Kind of like sex trafficking, but pornography instead.
Which is not, a first go-to.
No, again, Bible Belt is where this took place.
It's almost like this could be a hate crime.
Yeah. Additionally, the reputation of this business, having a lot of gay clientele, deterred community cooperation amid prevailing stigmatization of homosexuality at the time, which still happens to this day. But I would argue in the Bible Belt at any time, the stigmatization is much worse there. Police also...
Not called the Bible Belt for nothing.
Yeah. The police also speculated that it could have been a mafia hit, a business dispute, truthfully anything, because they didn't have definitive evidence for a motive. There was the possibility, and I would say this makes the most sense, that it was a straight-up hate crime, especially, with the establishment known for its gay clientele. There were also reports that allege prior incidents at this specific adult bookstore, including a threatening note, Ku Klux Klan literature left at the store, kind of like how people leave Christian booklets and stuff in public bathrooms. They always
the KKK
were putting
likes
them
to hand things out here and there. They did that in our hometown at
the Halloween parade.
Yep.
Yeah. When I worked for one of the local grocery stores, we had them in the bathrooms all the time. Every time I would go in there, I'd be sitting on the sink. There was also bomb threats from hate groups on the building. These bomb threats lacked ties to specific perpetrators and were never found to have a substantiated plot against the store, but nonetheless, threats had been made. This motive does get some challenge, though, due to there being no manifestos that explicitly targeted the Shelby Bookstore, meaning that this type of motive would be based solely on bias without additional cooperation from other evidence or witnesses. So to assume that it's only a hate crime, I guess, would mean that you're not looking at all of the evidence, but I would make an argument that a lot of the evidence points towards hate crime. There was also the possibility that it could have been, quote, a jilted ex-lover of one of the men, or other personal vendettas or grudges.
Yeah, because, I really hate my ex so much that I'm going to take me and the boys and we're going to go burn down the place, execute them, and steal the money.
Yeah. I also think that's quite a dig at gay men.
Yeah, it's trying to deflect from the fact that this is most likely a hate crime.
Yeah.
Because this is planned out. This is premeditated. You don't go with incendiary bombs without expecting to do that to hide your work. You don't like this. It just seems so targeted so far from all the facts.
Yeah. This theory was ultimately ruled out, though, because police, looked through victim backgrounds, as the 3 deceased, the 2 customers and the clerk, lacked documented interconnections or prior animosities that would be traceable to suspects. So there wasn't a lot of crossover between the clerk and those 2 patrons, as well as the 2 men who survived. And there also didn't seem to be, when talking to these families and things like that, there didn't really seem to be a lot of people who would have like really intense enemies that would ever go about doing something like this.
I can see a way the X theory could work, but not in the way that they're probably thinking. Say somebody who's gay is with somebody who's closeted. That closeted person is in a very group that is very leaning anti-LGBTQ plus. And then they break up with a person they hate so much that they lean into the hate group they're in or around and then act upon it to get revenge.
There is a lot of conservative men who are closeted homosexuals for sure.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there's a good amount of people who are like closeted and then end up killing the other. I'm pretty sure I've heard some of those cases, but I don't know any off the top of my head. But like that is how that could work. But I highly doubt how you mentioned that was a theory was being utilized in the way that I just mentioned. No,
that's actually a really good point, though, especially down in the Bible.
Because we also got to realize that like if you want to, what I said there could realistically work. Do I think that's what happened here? No, but that could work in the real world. But whenever we're talking like this is not how they're thinking. Unfortunately, we got to think 1987 homophobic, most likely, on how they were thinking this.
Yeah, certainly. It would be like when the RNC's in town and the use of Grindr goes crazy.
There's not much data to back that up, but I know there is actually a good amount of like, there are quite a few Republican members and staffers who do end up having same-sex relationships on the side.
Which isn't a problem.
No.
But it's a problem if you sign laws that target the actual people who are trying to live their life freely and openly and with love.
And your closest friends are also hate that group.
Yeah.
So that's where it's interesting, and it's just so weird and confusing.
Yeah. I would say a lot of American politics is like that. But so the absence of interpersonal links between the customers and the clerk, as well as not having conflicts or anything that anyone could really identify, did undermine the idea that there would have been a revenge kind of theory or a grudge or something like that, and they kind of pushed the focus of investigators back to like how impersonal this crime was and how brutal it was. So there's a lot of belief that when someone is murdered execution style, it is far more impersonal than if they're murdered face to face. It's because like in my understanding is that's why like shooting someone in the back of the head is a lot different than strangling someone to death, because it's far more, obviously there's two different things, but it's far more personal to hold your hands around someone's throat and kill them that way and things like that. So they're looking at it again like this is extremely impersonal. It is very brutal. What the hell is the motive for this thing? Eventually, evidence at the scene would lead the investigators to suspect the involvement of right-wing extremist groups, and they turned their attention to Frazier Glenn Miller Jr., who was, have you heard of that name before?
No.
Okay, so he was the leader of the North Carolina-based White Patriot Party, the WPP, and the previous Grand Wizard of the North Carolina chapter of the Ku Klux Klan.
The Patriot Party is called the PP Party. Is it because they got small PPs?
It's the WPP.
Oh, Whittle PP Party?
Yeah, the White Patriot Party.
Okay, so, they're the Whittle PP Party is what I'll call them now.
I like that. So just to give you a perspective on this group, here's just a little bit of background on them, which I think ends up being important to the story. So the White Patriot Party was an American anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, homophobic, white supremacist, paramilitary political party associated with Christian identities and the Ku Klux Klan. They promoted vigilante justice against what they perceived as, quote, moral decay, including explicit and loud opposition to homosexuality and adult bookstores as sites of degenerate behaviors. Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. was not only the leader of the White Patriot Party, but he was actually the founder. In the mid-1970s, the organization was founded as the Carolina Knights of the KKK, which was involved in the 1979 Greensboro Massacre, which was a confrontation between Klansmen, Nazis, and communists that escalated into a shootout and mass shooting that left 5 people dead and 12 wounded. Not long after that, in 1980, the party changed its name to the Confederate Knights of the KKK, and then would later become the White Patriot Party in 1985. On April 6th, 1987, just a few months following the murders, Miller and the White Patriot Party would declare war on the United States federal government, which they were calling the Zionist occupation government. I'm not really sure how they intended to fight war against the government, but ultimately, only a few weeks later, on April 30th of 1987, Miller and a few of his Klansmen, Douglas Lawrence Sheets, Robert Eugene Jackson, and Anthony Wydra, were arrested at Miller's mobile trailer home in Ozark, Missouri. The raid stemmed from federal racketeering charges against the WPP for operating as an unregistered militia involved in extortion and illegal arms possession, with evidence pointing to plans for domestic terrorism. Inside the mobile home was a large cache of weapons that included C4 and dynamite explosives, automatic assault rifles, and a half-ton of ammunition. That's 1,000 pounds of ammunition.
Wow.
That really is fit for a paramilitary. Surprisingly, Miller actually cooperated with authorities, though this was obviously in an attempt to reduce the consequences for his involvement in the WPP and his plans for domestic terrorism. He entered a plea deal on May 15th of 1987, pleading guilty to multiple felony counts, including bomb-making and firearms violations, in exchange for a reduced 5-year sentence and protection as a confidential informant. Yep, that is right. You heard me correct. This dude became an FBI informant.
And they get away with a lot of things.
Absolutely, they get away with a lot of things.
That's a serious problem with informants getting the do whatever you want clearance on various groups.
I do go into that a little bit later, but yes. So how does this tie to the bookstore murders? Well, a part of Miller's plea deal was that he was required to testify against his WPP associates, the very ones that he had been in charge of for almost 2 decades. His testimony would effectively dismantle the WPP network due to their leader turning, as well as shield Miller from harsher penalties tied to the group's broader criminal complex. Miller gave a statement to the police as a part of his deal. So he was testifying against them for their involvement in the arms exchanges and the weaponry and all those kinds of things. But in his statement to police, as part of his deal, he states that his fellow arrestees, Douglas Lawrence Sheets and Robert Eugene Jackson, were responsible for the murders at the Shelby Bookstore. Reportedly, an informant, whom I would suspect is Miller, because that's the only informant we know of, stated that the motive for the murders was, quote, avenge Yahweh on homosexuals. I'm not super familiar with Yahweh.
That's God.
I know that. I guess I'm just confused how.
Old Testament, that's what he was called.
How do you avenge, like, killing homosexuals is avenging Yahweh?
I guess so.
Okay. Bullshit. So Sheets was 40. He was of Meeker, Oklahoma. And Jackson, they didn't put I couldn't find an age for him at the time, of Midwest City, Oklahoma, were indicted for the murders of 19-year-old Travis Melton, 29-year-old Kenneth Godfrey, and 26-year-old Paul Weston in November of 1987. The indictments also included charges of robbery with a dangerous weapon and first-degree arson against both men, stemming from reports that the perpetrators had stolen cash from the premises and then set fire to cover their tracks. Sheets and Jackson, and this is Sheets with an S on the end, so not as good as the Sheets with a Z. This guy sucks ass. He's a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, I don't want his last thing to be shared with a
so I'm glad
gas station.
Yeah, the best gas station with the best food. Sheets, and you only know that if anyone comes in here and says anything about fucking Rudders and Wawa or Royal Farms, suck my ass.
Rudders does have better milkshakes.
They do have better milkshakes, but everything else is better at Sheets.
Their steak subs are better at Rudders.
Their mozzarella sticks at Sheets are so good. So, anywho, Sheets and Jackson were set to have their trials begin in 1989, and they were set to be tried separately, which I'm not really sure how the courts determine whether they're going to try people together or try them separately, because I know in some cases, like, they will try you all together in one trial, and then there's others where they'll separate it.
Taking guess if they have, if one has an alibi and the other, it hurts the overall case.
Yeah, I'm not super sure.
I don't know.
So Sheets was tried first from April to May of 1989. During his trial, Miller testified that Sheets and Jackson had boasted to him about committing the murders and appeared to have details about how the murders occurred. He stated that Jackson told him that Sheets had pistol whipped one of the men causing his gun to discharge. The gunman then shot the men on the ground in what I assume was an attempt to reduce witnesses to the pistol whipping. Miller also claimed the pair boasted of shooting victims in video booths and setting fire to cover their tracks, which some sources say is consistent with the crime scene's execution-style shootings and arson. However, I'm not sure that this would be the case just because of how the murders were described as the victims lying face down on the floor and then shot execution style. I didn't hear anything about any of the victims being found in video booths that were there. I only heard about them being ordered to lay down on the floor of the shop floor. The prosecution worked to corroborate this testimony by calling other witnesses to the stand, including Rob Stoner, who was another member of Miller's group, who reported hearing Sheets and Jackson discuss the murders in the months following the attack. It was mentioned that this gentleman was incarcerated and was roommates with Sheets when he was discussing this. Allegedly, Rob was paid $5,000 to testify for the prosecution. I would gather that's an incentive to say what they want you to say. Prosecutors relied heavily on Sheets and Jackson's ties to extremist groups with blatant views against the lifestyle of the victims. They based their arguments on the testimony of Miller, despite him also having been a part of these groups, and his motive to cooperate with them, even if it meant lying, because that meant he was getting a lessened sentence. All in all, it was just extreme selfishness and self-preservation, and that Miller would say whatever he needed to say. Additional leads came from associates within Oklahoma's white supremacist circles, including mentions of Hugh Black and Jeff Johnston as potential accomplices who helped plan or cover up the crime. Remember, there was either 3 or 4 men. Not 100% sure. The men who were shot couldn't give a definitive answer whether there was 3 or 4. They believe it was 3 inside, 1 that stood lookout and outside. So this would be 4 men if that was the case. Neither of these men, though, faced charges due to insufficient direct evidence tying them to the Shelby incident, though Hugh Black did spend 16 months in jail for obstructing justice because he refused to testify about the incident to a federal grand jury.
I wonder why he'd refused to testify.
Yeah, so there's some suspiciousness there. Fibers found on the plastic jugs used to set the Shelby Bookstore on fire were matched to fibers from gloves found in the Missouri mobile home where the men were arrested in April.
Okay, so that's more definitive matching of fibers, because it's actually on one of the objects.
Yes. However, though, there was no definitive way to match these gloves to any of the men that were in the trailer that day, and who knows how many people came through that trailer in a few months' time. They were just happened to be there, which would indicate that there's definitely some involvement there.
There's a connection.
We just can't tell exactly who it is that was wearing them.
And unfortunately, the law has to be very exact and precise.
Yes. However, prosecutors could not place either Sheets or Jackson, both Oklahoma residents, in Shelby, North Carolina on the night of the shooting. Sheets had an alibi placing him in Kansas the day before the murders, January 16th, in which a blizzard struck Kansas, making it almost impossible for Sheets to have arrived in North Carolina by the night of January 17th. And not only that, the distance between Kansas and North Carolina rendered cross-country travel from Kansas to the East Coast highly improbable within the time frame required to reach the crime scene. Now that I'm reading my own notes, happened January 17th. It was January 18th in the morning that the police arrived. Additionally, sorry, are you going to say something?
I was going to say, so he said he was in there and they were able to confirm he was in Kansas?
Yes, and he would not have been able to make it back to North Carolina in time.
I think somebody might have lied for him.
I don't know.
It seems like they got
my understanding is that I'm pretty sure that there was, receipt charges or something that he had. I couldn't find exact evidence, but it said that there was evidence.
Okay, I'm just I don't mean to doubt.
I doubt every part of this.
Yeah.
Part.
It seems like all the people there around all have the same opinions as that each other and would lie. I mean, one of them did 16 months, so they couldn't move further on this.
Yeah.
Some of these are willing to go to long lengths to make sure the others can continue their hate.
Yeah. Additionally, there was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, ballistics, or eyewitness testimony that placed Sheets at the bookstore. And there really was nothing tying him to there. So following all of, the evidence or lack thereof, the jury acquitted Sheets on all murder charges in May of 1989, citing insufficient evidence to prove his involvement beyond a reasonable doubt.
That absolutely sucks.
It does suck.
Now, let's take a moment to dwell on this. I'm going to give us a quick ad here because we've been going quite a little bit here. It's hard to really put this in anywhere in this episode, guys. But take a listen to this ad from a podcast we are friends with, and then we'll be back in about a minute.
Hey, he's Ken.
And she's Em.
And together we're the hosts of Do You Dare? So, Do You Dare is our podcast where we discuss all things true crime,
all things paranormal,
and all things history, mystery, and beyond.
Plus, don't forget the aliens.
Oh, that's silly of me. How could I forget those?
We're just two British siblings with mics, hoping to bring some spooky, some twisted, and some downright sinister to your ears.
If you like what you're listening to right now, type in Do You Dare into wherever you get your podcasts and join us as we delve into all things dark and spine-tingling with our customary British flair.
Come join the dark side, if you dare.
Alright, welcome back, everybody.
Hey, everybody, thank you for letting us have that very short palate cleanser. We're going to return to some horrificness, because it just gets me more angry as I continue forward. Following the acquittal of co-defendant Sheets in May of 1989, the charges that were levied against Robert Jackson were subsequently dropped by prosecutors, and the entire trial for him was canceled. Unfortunately for the families and the prosecution, Jackson was facing the same charges of 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as the other charges that were related to arson and the 2 men that survived the attack. The same challenges, though, were faced by the prosecution in terms of evidence, and therefore it would have likely been a waste, honestly, of taxpayer dollars if the trial continued and just got the same result of an acquittal as they got for Sheets. Additionally, Jackson also had an alibi that had placed him out of state at the time of January 17th attack on the adult bookstore, and again, there was no direct physical or eyewitness testimony that linked him to the scene. I don't know how you would get the eyewitness testimony, considering they were all wearing masks, and that would be extremely difficult to be able to tell any of them apart, but nonetheless, there's nothing connecting him to the scene. Much of the prosecution's case relied on hearsay statements from witnesses, such as claims that Jackson had discussed the killings while incarcerated, just like Sheets did. But these failed to establish presence or participation, mirroring the shortcomings that led to Sheets' not guilty verdict. No new evidence emerged in the interim to strengthen the charges, prompting authorities to end pursuit rather than risk another acquittal on circumstantial grounds. Do you think we need to be worried about the ice machine? Jackson was released without further legal jeopardy in connection to the incident, closing the chapter on indictments stemming from early investigative leads tied to the murders and possible motive to white supremacist circles. However, this did not mean that there were no potential suspects or theories. Still, during Sheets' trial, his defense team's strategy directed a lot of attention to Mr. Miller himself as a suspect in the murders. Sheets testified that Miller was the one who actually boasted about orchestrating the attack on the adult bookstore, and that he claimed that he had, quote, damn sure made a big boom in Shelby. The statement of big boom suggested some insider knowledge of the explosive devices used to arson the bookstore after the shootings. Miller also reportedly referenced specific details of the crime scene, including a 2-way mirror inside the bookstore.
Wait, is Miller the guy who's the confidential informant?
Yes.
Okay.
So he knew about the 2-way mirror inside the bookstore, which was not something the general public knew at the time of the murders, suggesting that he would have had to have prior knowledge of the bookstore in order to know that information, which would likely mean he would have had to have been there before.
Probably to scout it out, honestly.
Yeah. This pre-raid awareness of non-public facts raised suspicions about how Miller obtained them, as no alternative explanation, such as media leaks, has been documented for those particular details at that time. So he had to have known them without the help of the media.
I'm starting to believe that he was part of it, and he used 2 other associates, put them there, who were not there, to protect everybody.
Yeah. Additionally, unlike Sheets and Jackson, who presented alibis that placed them out of state at the time of murders and arson, with Sheets, again, supported by evidence of travel to Kansas amid a blizzard that hindered him accessing North Carolina, as well as Jackson also having been out of state, Miller provided no verifiable evidence for an alibi for the night of the killings. His leadership of the White Patriot Party, which in its distributed declaration of war document against the government assigned, quote, points for assassinations of gay individuals among other targets in the area. which aligned with the execution-style shootings at an adult bookstore, again known for its gay clientele, though no forensic evidence, just as with the others, has ever directly tied Miller to the scene. Which, if you ask me, assigning points like it's a fucking game of, like, when I was younger, we had this game where you got points for, like, yellow cars, and it was, like, double points if you saw a yellow punch buggy. For it to be assigned points like that is one of the most disgusting things I think I have ever heard in my life.
Pretty important.
And my heart is breaking that I even had to say those words out loud, because that's fucking unbelievable. Just absolutely disgusting. I just want to put that out there. Also, one of Sheets' lawyers alleged that in pretrial detention, Miller had told Sheets and Jackson, quote, "I'm going to be pointing the finger at you, but don't worry, you can't be convicted because it's all hearsay evidence." This guy knew what he was doing.
Yeah, no, he definitely knew what he was doing with the two people he chose to be accused, and to the details he said. I think, so far from what I'm hearing, I think he knew to pin the blame on two people who could not take it, but had enough association with him to be suspect, and use his FBI informant role to basically get this thing off the books.
Yep. Unfortunately, the fact that they wouldn't be convicted was true, in a sense, because a lot of the evidence was circumstantial and hearsay, and Sheets was acquitted and Jackson's charges were dropped. So he wasn't technically wrong in that, which pisses me off. Additionally, Sheets' attorneys, Les Farfor and Kirk Lyons, have also said that they believe Miller was one of the perpetrators of the shooting, because a year after the shooting, Miller's White Patriot Party published a pamphlet claiming credit for burning an adult bookstore in Shelby. So ultimately, despite the dismantling of the WPP when he started testifying against his associates, it didn't actually get completely dismantled until 1980 or 1990. So 3 years after. So there was still a couple of years where it was running. It was just slowly kind of dwindling because there really wasn't any leadership, which was a good thing, if you ask me. Unfortunately, prosecutors declined to charge Miller with involvement in the murders at the Shelby Bookstore due to, what do you think it is?
Circumstantial evidence. He was an informant.
Yep, you guessed it. Insufficient evidentiary standards under North Carolina law, which requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt for homicide indictments, not just convictions, as well as the fact that he was an informant for the FBI. For some of the biggest domestic terrorist organizations in the country. We're talking the KKK. That's insane. Just as with Sheets and Jackson, the key aspects missing from the case were physical evidence, such as fingerprints, DNA, or ballistics, that directly linked Miller to the crime scene. Just like Sheets and Jackson's trials relied on Miller's testimony, investigations into Miller also relied heavily on hearsay statements from associates like Sheets and Jackson, who implicated group members but provided no distinct corroborated testimony placing Miller at the bookstore. I would also make an argument that this is the leader of the party that they belong to. For them to... It's not like I don't know if it's a revenge thing or if it's I don't really know how to describe it. He's the leader of the party that they belong to. This dude has so much freaking power. No way are they gonna, other than hearsay arguments like he said for them, are they gonna put definitive evidence in there for him? At least in my opinion. Additionally, it appears that the hearsay evidence that Miller used against Sheets and Jackson was basically just turned around on him instead, which again would mean it was all hearsay and circumstantial. Miller's status as a federal informant also severely complicated state-level pursuits of charges against him. After being arrested at the end of April in 1987 on the charges that allowed for the raid of his mobile home in Oklahoma, Miller entered that plea agreement with federal prosecutors that would grant him immunity from federal prosecution in exchange for testifying against his white supremacist associates. This deal, which resulted in a reduced 5-year sentence that Miller only served by 1990 because he only served 3 years, shielded him from liability for any group activities, meaning anything that the KKK or his WPP does, he can't be charged for it because it shields him from being charged with the group activities. And North Carolina authorities lacked independent evidence to overcome potential double jeopardy or immunity extensions for state charges that tied to the same criminal enterprise. So they didn't want to risk trying him for state charges when he has all this immunity from federal charges.
That's so fucking stupid.
It is. It's the dumbest shit I have ever heard.
The immunity that informants get, and informants also get rewarded basically off just like accusing random people also of shit. It's a huge problem in this country where like you're an informant, oh, you need to keep that informant status. This random person I met before, yeah, they're a drug smuggler, arrest him, spend like a year ruining his life, and then he gets off because it's not really true. But hey, you know what? I saved my status as an informant.
Yep. So critics of not prosecuting Miller have pointed to the potential of investigative biases favoring informants, noting Miller's leadership in the Carolina Knights of the KKK, as well as his prior rantings about targeting what he calls deviants as, reasons as to why his status as an informant should not have been held in such a high regard. Also, families of the victims had long voiced similar views, citing Miller's local presence and history of violent rhetoric against minorities and homosexuals. However, Sheets' acquittal underscored the prosecutorial burden of evidentiary direct proof over circumstantial leadership ties. Basically meaning, again, because of the way that our Constitution is written, there has to be the burden of proof for a crime is on the prosecution. Like, you are innocent until you are proven guilty. The proof is not for someone to not necessarily prove themselves not guilty. The prosecution has to prove beyond that reasonable doubt that this person is guilty of a crime. So all Sheets' trial did was just reiterate the Constitution's notion that it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Miller did end up serving some time, like I said. He served 3 years of his 5-year plea deal sentence, which you asked me, again, is fucking bullshit. Those charges were for the weapons charges that he had gotten after the raid on his home. It's not enough time. It'll never be enough time. I guess it's at least something, but still, he got off pretty much scot-free.
Wish it would have been life.
Yeah. Sheets and Jackson, while acquitted of the murders at the Shelby Bookstore, did each still receive 20-year prison sentences for multiple counts of possessing unregistered firearms and explosives, though.
Did they actually serve all 20 years?
I couldn't find whether they served the whole year 20 years, but my understanding is they served a majority of it. These charges, pursued under federal firearms laws, were predicated on the group's undocumented threats of insurrection against racial minorities, Jews, and the U.S. government, but remained distinct from any state-level murder prosecutions related to the Shelby incident. This was so there was no chance of double jeopardy in this case. The severity of the sentences reflected the scale of the discovered weaponry, over 100 illegal guns and bombs in total. But they didn't. They each got early paroles. I don't know how much time it was, but it was sometime in the 1990s. But they got sentenced in 1989, somewhere in the mid-90s, that they got charged or they got released. And this is because there was prison overcrowding, and technically they had good behavior while in prison. This facilitated their release and their subsequent re-entry into civilian life, setting the stage for renewed investigative interest in unresolved matters years later. Because this would be exactly what happened. April 13th, 2014, Miller killed 3 people in 2 separate shootings at Jewish centers in Overland Park, Kansas. Following these murders, Cleveland County Sheriff Alan Norman sought to interview Miller in 2014 amid the renewed scrutiny.
So Miller, the guy who, the informant guy.
Yep. He went on to kill 3 people and shoot a couple other people in 2 separate shootings at Jewish centers in Kansas.
Did he get away with this one?
He did not.
Oh.
So they wanted to interview him about the Shelby murders, again, because his name's coming back up. He's murdered people now with definitive evidence that he did it. Can we connect him back to these Shelby murders? He refused to cooperate. And with no new forensic developments to justify charges decades later from the shooting, nothing was pressed against him, and they couldn't force him to cooperate in this case. He would die at the El Dorado Correctional Facility on May 3rd of 2021. This is a maximum security prison located east of the city of El Dorado in rural Prospect Township, Butler County, Kansas. So he did die in prison, which, if you ask me, is an easier sentence than suffering. I could not find whether Sheets and Jackson have passed or are still alive. I'm assuming they are still alive because there is no dates or anything given of their death.
I think Sheets and Jackson were not involved in this.
I think they could have been involved in some of it.
Maybe planning, but not the action.
Just the association that they had with Miller.
I think they were not involved in the action of that night, and I think Miller used them as scapegoats, and they probably knowingly did that.
And
to
who was
protect
involved?
The other 2 or 3, and that Miller was one, and there were 2 or 3 others that got away with it entirely. I mean, Miller also got away with it, but at least he went to prison for the last years of his life. I wish that would have happened to the other 2 or 3.
I think that the 2 men earlier, especially the one who served the 16 months for not.
I think he was involved.
I think he was involved too.
Yeah.
What's the aftermath of this? The Shelby Bookstore Murders, a triple homicide occurring on January 17th of 1987 at the Shelby Adult Bookstore in Shelby, North Carolina, remains officially unsolved as of the date of recording of this podcast in 2026. Cleveland County Sheriff's Office has classified it as an active cold case, lacking sufficient leads for resolution, but it is not officially closed. No arrests or convictions have ever been secured for the killings of Travis Melton, Kenneth Godfrey, and Paul Weston, despite investigations implicating potential suspects like Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. The case exemplifies prosecutory hurdles in some cases where the circumstantial evidence seems enough, but in reality, the lack of physical evidence takes away credence to the argument and where the prosecution is trying to go with their argument. The lack of legislative response to the shortcomings of the prosecution's case also underscores the minimal institutional adaptation to similar vulnerabilities. So even though we've seen this kind of thing happen over and over again, it even went on for Miller to then kill 3 people 3 decades later. I think 2 decades later, however, 2.5 decades later, there was still no changes made in any laws that would have reduced these vulnerabilities in cases like this. This just meant that there's still shit tons of risk that's unmitigated, at least in the state of North Carolina. Families of the victims...
I think it's everywhere because we're talking federal level too.
Yeah. Families of the victims continue to experience prolonged grief, compounded by the absence of closure, while local LGBTQ plus networks reference the incident as a cautionary tale of small-town indifference to crimes against sexual minorities. Critics have emerged regarding media portrayals that speculated on ideological extremism, such as white supremacist motives linked to Miller, and not on forensic corroboration, which could ensure biases against the victims and lead to less efforts by the courts to prove the case. So basically, media is saying, you pushed so much of this ideological narrative that these white supremacists hated homosexuals, and you didn't focus enough attention on trying to find forensic evidence. Did you do it on purpose because you just didn't want to put the same amount of effort into this case to solve the murders of 3 potentially gay men? I honestly didn't even read anywhere that these 3 men were actually identifying themselves as gay, or whether they were just in this bookstore. Because that doesn't, just because you're stepping foot in the bookstore doesn't mean you're gay. Otherwise, that would also mean the killers are gay, which would become a whole thing. That's just my thoughts on it, though. So I like to put this out there when we get an unsolved case like this. If you or anyone you know knows anything about this case, please reach out to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation at their cold case investigation team, which is at 800-334-3000, or you can contact them at coldcases@ncsbi.gov. You can also contact the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office in their Criminal Investigations Division at 704-484-4822. Again, if you have any leads, any evidence, anything that's, a legitimate thing that you could contact these people about, we're not putting in phony tips and shit like that. Anything that's legitimate, make the call. Anything that helps get an actual resolution for these families. For anyone in the LGBTQ plus community who is seeking help or needs assistance, please reach out to the following. The Trevor Project, you can call 866-488-7386 or text START in all capitals, that's START, to 678-678 for 24/7 suicide prevention and crisis intervention for youth. I will also link these resources below, or I'll have Frank put them in the description. You can also contact the Trans Lifeline. This is 877-565-8860 for confidential peer support run by and for trans individuals. There is also the LGBT National Help Center, which is 888-843-4564 for general support, coming out questions, and peer counseling. And that is what I have for you. Any final thoughts, Frank?
Well, I did look up because I was curious about Miller, just his shit outside and like whatnot. So I looked him up. He tried to become the Democratic primary candidate for governor of North Carolina in 1984. He did not win.
Good.
He get 5,790 votes.
Well, those 5,790 people can go fuck themselves.
4 years later, he then went for the North Carolina Republican primary election.
In 88?
Sorry, no, it's 2 years later, in 86.
Oh, okay.
And he got 3.17% of the vote.
Those 3.17% of voters can fuck themselves.
And 6,682 people voted for him. In 2006, he went for Missouri's 7th congressional.
This fucker.
And he got 23 votes in that one.
He served time in prison for arms charges and shit, and then likely got away with murder.
Yep.
And then 26 people voted for him.
Then he went for U.S. Senator for Missouri in 2010 and got 7 votes.
Fuck those 7 people. Go fuck yourselves.
Probably one of them. He also wrote a book called The White Man Speaks Out.
Ew. Ew.
Yeah, everything I'm seeing on his Wikipedia page is so much worse.
Disgusting. A piece of garbage trash.
And
a waste of human bones, blood, and all
I'm not advocating
organs.
for his book or anything, but I'm saying the first thing he says in the book is, if the Jews can have a Jewish state of their own, then why can't a white Christian state? Why can't we have a white Christian state of our own?
Brothers, fuck off.
I'm not condoning any of that belief. I think this man's a horrible person. His beliefs are awful.
That is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, everything I see on here, he's a disgusting.
Is it bad of me
being.
to say that he was a waste of human bones, blood, and organs?
Nope.
Because fuck. Listen, if any of you are mad at me about saying that, or you think that's too harsh or whatever, please remember that this guy could possibly be responsible for at least 6 murders. His party was involved in the Greensboro massacre, which also killed 5 people and wounded 12. He has, at the very least, what we know of definitively is he himself at least killed 3 people. And those were individuals who were Jewish at Jewish community centers. This motherfucker deserves to be dead. And he is, and that's good. I wish he would have suffered the rest of his life in prison, but hopefully he's suffering in hell. Sorry, I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah. Fuck this guy.
Yeah, so moral of the story, don't be a fucking bigot. Hug your friends, tell your friends you love them, and be an ally to all. Just love everybody. Why can't we do that? Jesus. But anyway, anything else, Frank, before we close this out?
Just, that the action of being LGBTQ plus should never result in murder.
It shouldn't result in any kind of hate. It shouldn't
result in any type of hate, any negative connotation. Negative things that happen to you should be like punishments for your lifestyle should be about if you do shit like murder and whatnot. Like what was his first name? Glenn?
Yeah.
Glenn,
or Fraser Glenn.
Yeah. Glenn Miller, his eventual arrest for those murders, that's what should happen to. Those are the people who are wrong in the world. The white supremacists, the murderers. The hate
pedophiles.
The hate in this world is what we should be condemning, not condoning.
Absolutely, 100%
we
agree.
Too often condone, hate, and condemn the innocent, and that is unfortunately the world we live in. And it just change can be as simple as any one of us changing our outlook on this.
And you can take this out if I'm incorrect, but is this not what Jesus died for?
He died for our sins.
I don't
and
consider...
he also, spent time with hookers and tax collectors.
Sex workers.
In that time, it was considered prostitutes.
Now we call them sex workers.
Yes. I don't know why I used the word hooker. I think it's because I was watching something today on talking about the 101 scariest horror movie moment, and in The Fly, Jeff Goldblum referred to a woman as a hooker.
Oh, okay.
And I've not seen the word hooker in a while, and then it was Jeff Goldblum using, and they mentioned like not the most correct term nowadays, but back then he called her a hooker in the movie.
Yeah, I also want to make sure that everyone understands blatantly clearly. I didn't say that because I believe that homosexuality and anyone in the LGBTQ plus is committing a sin. I said that because we shouldn't be condemning the innocent, which is essentially what's happening.
Also, you can have your views on whether or not you agree or disagree with the LGBTQ. I think they should be accepted, but obviously not everybody believes that. If you don't believe that, fine, you have your own belief. It doesn't give you the right to choose violence,
even of the verbal kind.
Yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah. So check the description down below. Frank's gonna put the resources for contacting the police as well as the resources for LGBTQ plus individuals. If you happen to need those, please utilize them. They're there for a reason. So, and we love you all of our listeners.
Yep,
unless you're a fucking bigot.
Yeah.
Then I'm sorry, I can't.
To all of our lettuce.
What?
I forget. There's this.
What's the G? Lettuce, grapes, bacon, tomatoes. What the fuck would Q be?
Cucumber spelled with a Q.
So
and plus
dumb.
friends. We love you guys.
God, that was pathetic.
Our lettuce, grapes, bacon,
Brussels sprouts,
tomato, cucumber friends out there, plus every other topping you can put on a sandwich. We love you guys. Stay
we were
safe
just
out
building
there.
a BLT. A BLT with extras. God, that's so bad. That's not meant to be offensive to anybody. Please don't take that offensively. Anyway, ready to sign us off?
Yeah, I think so. All right, everybody. Oh, actually, sorry, before you end that, if you like what you're listening to, go find us on socials, our Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. Go give us a like, comment, follow, subscribe, review on whatever platform you're on. Every little bit helps and helps boost us in the algorithm. So thank you guys for coming back week after week and supporting us. I think that's it. So, Sage, are you ready? And remember,
To look for.
the unknown
And so,
and the unseen.
thanks for listening.
Bye, guys.
Love your neighbor.